Hello everyone and welcome back to The Lost Planeswalker. You're here with me, Jesse, The Lost Planeswalker, and today I am doing a commander deck tech on Sauron the Dark Lord. This is a cool new commander from the Lord of the Rings set, and I figured, let's build a deck around this. He's really powerful and really cool. So starting off, Sauron the Dark Lord, 3 generic, blue, black, red, legendary creature, avatar, horror. Ward, sack a legendary artifact or creature you control. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, amass orcs 1, and whenever an army you control deals combat damage to a player, the ring tempts you. When the ring tempts you, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 4 cards. Sauron the Dark Lord is a really cool card that mixes a little bit of everything, He's got that blue, letting you pitch your hand and draw cards when the ring tempts you. You are having to sack things for black. It's a really cool commander. There's a lot of ways to really build this deck, and the way I'm going to build this deck, just so everybody knows, is this is going to be a amass matters / rings tempt you matters deck, right? I want to keep refilling our hand. We want to keep playing those spells to just get value. Just pitch a hand that's empty and get 4 cards for free. That seems amazing, and there's a lot of the ring tempts you cards in this set, so let's just dive in. And we're going to start off with mana rocks. This is a expensive commander first off, and so if he dies, we want to be able to recast him right away. But also, there's just a ton of good expensive cards that we want to be able to cast as fast as possible, so ramping with these mana rocks is going to be really important. So starting off, we have Arcane Signet, Commander Sphere, and Inherited Envelope. These are all just great cards. They all let you tap for any mana, which is super great. Next, we have Dimir Signet, Izzet Signet, and Rakdos Signet. These are going to tap for all of our colors we need. In addition, we have the Talisman of Creativity, Talisman of Dominance, and Talisman of Indulgence. Another way just to hit those colored mana, just to make sure we're mana fixed the entire time. And lastly, we have Mind Stone and Soul Ring. Mind Stone can be used to draw some cards later in the game, and Soul Ring is just in here because it's one of the best artifacts ever created. So that's a real quick run through. Next, we're going to go through some of the more utility artifacts that is really going to help our strategy and do exactly what we want. So first off, what we want to do is make that giant orc, right? So we want to be able to give him trample or give everything else trample. So we have Dragon Throne of Tarkir, Embercleave, Luxodon Warhammer, and Shadow Spear. All of these equipment are going to give our big orc army trample first off, and a whole bunch of other added benefits. Luxodon Warhammer and Shadow Spear give lifelink, Embercleave gives double strike, and Throne of Tarkir is a really unique artifact that I don't see in a lot of decks, because you equip it to a creature and that creature becomes a defender. Okay, that's fine. But the best part about this is you just pay 2 and tap other creatures you control, gain trample, and get +X until end of turn, where X is this creature's power. If you're amassing an orc 10 times, which is really easy in this deck, all of your other creatures get +10 and trample. This is a win-con card. This is super powerful. Next up, we have Phyrexian Altar, Relic of Sauron, and the One Ring. Phyrexian Altar can be used if you want to play this a little differently. You're going to be amassing a lot of orcs. You can just instantly sack them to make a ton of mana and just cast more spells and just keep going. So that's a really cool way to do this. Relic of Sauron is, it's a mana rock, but it also can tap to draw some cards, which is great. And then you have the One Ring, which is one of the best cards from this set. It's super powerful. It's super expensive. If you haven't picked up a copy, I would look into it maybe. It is going for, between $40 and $50 right now, which is insane because it was like $13 at some point I was looking. But it is indestructible. The turn you play it, you just gain protection from everything until your next turn. And you can put a burden counter on it and draw a card for each burden counter, but lose an amount of life when it untaps for that. So this is really strong because you start by putting 1 on, draw 1 card. Next turn you draw 2 cards. Next turn you draw 3, 4, 5. On turn 4 or 5, whenever you can tap it with 5 burn counters on it, you're drawing 5 cards. At that point you've drawn 15 cards, but you've lost 10 life in the process. So that's really powerful. If you can't win the game with 15 cards extra, I don't know what you're doing there, but this card is insane and is very strong. Moving on, we're gonna go over all of the ring tempt you cards, right? Because the 2 parts of this deck, amassing orcs and the ring tempts you is we want to be able to constantly refill our hand, all right? And there's 25 ways to do that in this deck. So starting off, we have Bilbo's Birthday Escape, Breaking of the Fellowship, and Call of the Ring. Bilbo's Birthday Escape, gonna draw you a card, ring tempts you. Breaking of the Fellowship is gonna be able to get rid of some of your opponent's creatures while the ring tempts you. And the Call of the Ring is really sick because it's gonna tempt you every turn, meaning at the beginning of your upkeep, you can just pitch your hand, draw 4 cards, and if you want, you can choose a new ring bearer, and when you do, you can lose some life to draw a card. So in desperate situations, that could be really helpful. Next up, we have Claim the Precious, Fiery Inscription, and Golem Patient Plotter. Claim the Precious is a kill spell that ring tempts you. It's a murder with added benefit, so why not play this card? Fiery Inscription is one of the coolest cards, I think, out of this set. I think you can build a really powerful deck with it, but when it enters battlefield, the ring tempts you, and then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. I could see this being a really cool strategy where you basically build up a couple Fiery Inscriptions and then play out your hand. You can counter spells and, you know, other sorceries, and just in the process, you're going to kill an opponent. And Golem Patient Plotter is really sick because we can get him back from our graveyard and tap the ring tempts you, sack a creature, that could be our orc, and then you return it to our hand, so we can just keep casting it. So this is a really good card, another great recursion piece in a lot of decks. Next up, we have In the Darkness Blinds Them, Nazgul, and One Ring to Rule Them All. There's going to be some other enchantments later on, but all of them focus around the ring tempting you, which is super great. There's also a lot of added benefit in these, but the one I'm really excited to really show off is the Nazgul, right? 3 mana, creature, wraith, knight, death touch. When it enters the battlefield, the ring tempts you. Okay, perfect. Whenever the ring tempts you, you can put a +1/+1 counter on each wraith you control. Okay, that's really cool. A deck can have up to 9 of the card named Nazgul in it. This is where this card gets insane, right? If we get 1 or 2 out, that's great. The ring's going to tempt us. We can go through, pitch our hand, draw more cards, maybe get more Nazgul, continue to play them. But in this process, whenever the ring tempts you, put a +1/+1 counter on each wraith you control. If you have one of these out here and you know, do it 2 or 3 or 4 times, that's +4/+4 on every wraith. So this is a really sick way of really growing your board. You know, there's a couple other wraiths in the deck. I didn't build it around wraiths, but Nazgul are a sick card, and there's no wonder that they're getting expensive for an uncommon. Next up, we have Ranger's Firebrand, Rangers of Ithilien, and Romanir Lancer. Ranger's Firebrand is just a shock with the ring tempts you. Pretty great. Rangers of Ithilien can steal a creature from your opponent and the ring tempts you. And Rohan Lancers is really sick because it's a 1 red menace 1/1 with when it dies, the ring tempts you. So this is a really cool card. I could see this being really good in other strategies that involve knights. Not in this deck, but just in general. 1 mana 1/1 with menace is a pretty cool card. Next up, we have Sam's Desperate Rescue, Saruman's Ransom, and Scroll of Isildur. Soul's Desperate Rescue is a really cool card because we can return a creature to our hand, then the ring tempts you. Saruman's Ransom is sort of like a Fact or Fiction, except you only get to see what's in one of the piles, and then the ring tempts you, so that's pretty good. And then the Scroll of Isildur is another one of those enchantments that the ring tempts you, and then you get a lot of other benefit from the other parts of the card. And then lastly, we have Soothing of Smeagol and There and Back Again. Soothing of Smeagol can help us return, you know, maybe a pesky creature, or maybe our opponents are playing in a mass deck and have a giant orc token. Well, just return that and it goes away forever. And There and Back Again, which is an incredibly powerful enchantment, it tempts us. We get to go search for a mountain, but at the 3rd step, we create a Smog creature token, which is a legendary 6/6 red dragon that when it dies, create 14 treasure token. This is an awesome, awesome card. I have a copy of this myself and I can't wait to play it. But this is the last of the ring tempts you, so now we're going to move into that amass mechanic. You know, we saw a little bit of it already, but these other cards in the set really focus around it. So first off, we have Corsairs of Umbar, Foray of Orcs, and Grishnark Brash Instigator. With the Corsairs, we can make an orc unblockable, which is really great. And whenever this deals combat damage, you amass Orcs 3, which is great. Foray of Orcs amasses 2 orcs. When it does, it deals X damage to target creature an opponent controls, where X is the amount of amassed orcs power. So if you had a 10/10 orc and you amass 2, it's a 12/12, and then you can just basically one-shot any creature you want. And Grishnar Brash Instigator lets you basically amass orcs 2 and then steal a non-legendary creature with power less than your army's power, and gets haste until end of turn. So this could be a really cool win con to steal your opponent's biggest or best creature and then hit them in the face with it. Our next 3 are March of the Black Gate, Murhur Urkai Captain, and Moria Scavenger. March from the Black Gate helps amass our orcs and make it bigger, because whenever it enters and whenever an army attacks, we amass orcs 1, which is really great. Malher Urkai Captain is possibly one of the coolest orcs, with if one or more counters would be put on an army, goblin or orc you control, that many +1 are put on it instead. So anytime we amass, we're going to amass for an additional 1, which is really great. Not something we see in these colors specifically, so this is very powerful. And Maria Scavengers is going to help us filter through our deck for the cards we want, and when we discard creatures, well, we amass orc 1. Next up, we have Orcish Bowmaster, Sauron the White, and Sauron of the White Hand. Orcish Bowmaster, I'm not going to talk too much about this because this is a card everybody should have. It's especially good in this deck because it's going to help build up our orc army and deal a bunch of damage, but this is a card that pretty much everyone should pick up. It's going to be very, very strong, and I can see it being a card played in many, many formats. Saruman the White is just going to help us amass. You know, all of those mana rocks are going to be great when we have this out because we're going to cast a little mana rock, cast another thing, we're going to make our army bigger, we can ring Temps us, just keep going over and over, so this is great. And Saruman of the White Hand is also going to help us when we cast those mana rocks, enchantments, you know, anything but a creature, because we're going to mass X, where X is that spell's mana value, which is awesome. And then goblins and orcs have ward 2, making our army slightly protected, so this is really great. And finally, we have Swarming of Maria and Ugluk of the White Hand. Swarming of Maria creates a treasure and amasses orc, which is just super great for us. And Ugluk of the White Hand is really neat because we can abuse that whenever we amass to sack it to make this or other orcs or goblins we control huge. So basically, whenever another creature dies, we put 1 counter on Ugluk of the White Hand, and if it was a goblin or orc, then we put 2 on it instead. This is kind of a really cool way to make a flavorful goblin orc deck where we build a Boros sort of Voltron deck in Rakdos. You know, we get him really big, we put an equipment on him, and then just swing out. So this is a really interesting card idea, especially because black makes a ton of tokens, red makes a ton of goblins, so I would actually really like to build this card in another video eventually. And before we talk about our lands, we have our final utility cards, and this is where, you know, the strategy can kind of shift up a bit. If you're not, you know, super pleased with building up a big orc, you know, I have some other pingers in here to help us deal a bunch of damage. So first off, we have Blasphemous Act, we have Blood Artist, and Mirkwood Bats. When we have a giant orc army, you know, we can just basically wrath the board and it'll live because it's going to deal 13 damage to each creature, so that's really good for us. Blood Artist, whenever our orc army dies, if we want to sack it to Phyrexian Altar, or, you know, it just gets killed normally, it's going to deal damage and we can gain life. And Mirkwood Bats is whenever you create or sack a token, each opponent loses 1 life. In the late game, if your opponents have a really big board state you can't get through, this might be the way to win. Every time you amass or whenever they cast a spell, you create an orc, so they're going to deal 1 damage, and then you can sack it to Phyrexian Altar, and they're going to deal another damage. So this could be a very good win con in the late game, especially if your opponents are low on life. Next up is Nightscape Familiar, Reanimate, and Ring Wraiths. Nightscape Familiar is just super cool because it's just going to help us cast our spells for cheaper. In addition, we can regenerate it, which is not an ability that is really around anymore, for just 1 in a black. So that seems really powerful. Reanimate's going to help us get our best creature back onto the battlefield. We're going to lose some life, but that's okay. And Ring Wraiths is going to help us basically deal some damage to our opponent's creatures by giving them -3/-3 and make them lose some life if it's legendary. And then whenever the ring tempts you, which we have 25 cards that do that, it's going to return from your graveyard to your hand. So this is a really cool card to be able to get that repetitive removal for small stuff, and we just get to cast it every turn. Now it's 6 mana, which isn't best, but we'll take what we can get. And then lastly, we have Shelob Dreadweaver, Witch King of Agamar, and Zulaport Cutthroat. Shelob is going to help us exile our opponent's creatures as they die, so this is going to be really good against graveyard decks. In addition, we can cast spells with it, so that's super cool. Witch King of Agamar is going to prevent our opponents from just attacking us because they have to sack creatures that dealt combat damage to us. And Zulaport Cutthroat is just another pinger that's going to help you gain life whenever an orc army dies. And then lastly, we're going to run through lands real quick. A couple of the cool lands from the new set are Barad-dûr and the Black Gate. This just has some orc synergy. Barad-dûr our Aurora does, and then the Black Gate can make one of our creatures unblockable, which is great. Of course, we have Command Tower, Crumbling Necropolis, Xander's Lounge. I also threw in a Rogue's Passage because, you know, if we have a 2020 Orc army, we can just make it unblockable and maybe knock someone out. And then lastly, we got Islands, Mountains, and Swamps. But yeah, that's it. This is a pretty cool deck. It didn't take me too long to brew, but just looking at the different effects and how you could build this, I think you could pop off really hard and just get in front of all your opponents and just take the game. You know, this commander just provides so many different ways to build it, and the way I chose I think is super fun. You know, you can do an aristocrat strategy that I kind of threw in there for, you know, if you draw those cards or, you know, you're trying to close out the game, but I think the really fun way is just make a giant orc army and swing out with it, right? So yeah, so I just want to say thank you so much for watching till the end. You know, this video isn't too long. I tried to give quick summaries of stuff, make these a little more palatable to watch. And if you enjoyed, please consider subscribing to my channel. I work really hard on these videos, and I'm trying to do more about, you know, really relevant commanders that people are super interested in. Give them a, you know, better idea of how I would build a deck. But thank you so much. You know, another way to help me out is to leave a comment down below. Is there a card that I left out, or maybe there's something where you're like, hey, no, do this instead. This, you know, really makes this card really more powerful. You know, please leave that in the comments below. I love reading the comments and seeing what everybody has to say. And, you know, just leave a like. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.